This is NBC Nightly News, Monday, December 17th. Reported by John Chancellor.
Good evening. Arab terrorists struck again today in Rome, Italy, and in a chronicle of terrorism which took them as far as Athens, Greece. Perhaps 35 people are dead tonight, including some Americans. It began when a group of Arabs with submachine guns sprayed bullets across a crowded departure lounge at Rome's Leonardo da Vinci airport. That was followed by the firebombing of a Pan American plane where 29 passengers died. The Arabs then hijacked a Lufthansa jet, but for the Rome part of the story, here is a satellite report.
The Pan American airliner was about to take off for Beirut when it was hit. 2 incendiary bombs thrown by Arab terrorists. They reached the plane by surprising police at a security checkpoint and shooting their way through the airport's transit lounge. Most of the damage was interior. 1 bomb exploded inside the plane. First Officer Robert Peterson described what happened.
At that point, I said they're going to blow the airplane up, and I told the engineer and the stewardess that were in the galley to open the galley door and to start evacuating the passengers. And I was standing there in the aisle when the first hand grenade went off. And the airplane immediately filled up with smoke, and another hand grenade went off. And it got to the point where we were either going to suffocate or try to leave the airplane. And there was no way that we could get out because we didn't know if they were standing at the doorway waiting for us or not. But finally, I just ran. I ran out the front door, and there was no one else around the airplane at that time. And I saw the over-wing exit open up. So I ran to the back of the wing, and I started helping passengers off the wing, the back of the wing, and tried to get them away from the airplane. But there were only maybe 12 people that came out of that exit. And there were a lot more people on that airplane than 12.
Finally, the bodies were taken off. The pilot's wife was among the victims. Most of the survivors escaped through emergency exits. Some of them described how fragments from the incendiary grenades burned through their clothes and skin. At first, it was thought that the terrorists wanted the release of several Arabs on trial here for planning to shoot down an El Al plane with a rocket launcher. But the attack in Rome lasted only a few minutes, and the terrorists were on their way aboard the hijacked Lufthansa.
The hijackers, having blown up the Pan Am plane, crossed the airport, as Quinn reported, and hijacked this Lufthansa plane at the Rome airport. They forced it to be flown to Athens, where they demanded the release from jail of 2 Palestinian guerrillas, members of the Black September group. In a grisly tactic, the terrorists said they would go on shooting hostages aboard the plane until the Arab prisoners were released. And in that shooting, 4 people died. The 2 Arab prisoners were then brought to the airport. The hostages included 6 Italian policemen, an Italian airport worker, 2 Lufthansa employees, an Ethiopian Airlines mechanic, and the 4-man crew of the plane. The terrorists demanded that half a dozen Arab diplomats accompany them on the hijacked plane. But the diplomats refused to go. The latest word from Athens is that sharpshooters at the airport have shot out the tires of the big jet, and that's all we know at this moment. This takes place, of course, just a few days before the Middle East Peace Conference begins. NBC News today learned that Secretary of State Kissinger and Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko will be the co-chairman of that conference. We'll have the details. Winter weather, and a lot of it, hit the eastern part of the country today, and we'll cover that story. And from Idaho, we'll have a report on how a particularly beautiful and valuable part of the country is being fought over by developers and conservationists.
NBC Nightly News is brought to you by Anacin, the tablets that help relieve minor arthritis pain and arthritis stiffness.
Hang a curtain? Simple, except on those occasions when arthritis flares up with minor pain and its stiffness. For help, take Anacin. Anacin contains the pain reliever most recommended by doctors for arthritis. When even simple movement can cause pain, Anacin relieves minor pain and so its stiffness for hours. Brings more freedom of movement without pain. For hours of relief from minor arthritis pain and its stiffness. For more freedom of movement without pain, take Anacin.
Does this Remington shave close?
Very. It's guaranteed for a year.
You mean the parts are guaranteed?
Not just the parts, but a close, comfortable shave.
How can they guarantee the shave?
Remington has a comfort head with 144 blades.
What's the catch?
None. Buy a Remington Mark shaver between November 1st and Christmas. Have a year to return it.
A year?
Mm-hmm. Just send shaver and sales slip to Remington for a complete refund.
Only Remington guarantees the shaver and the shave for 1 full year.
A year?
NBC News has learned that Secretary of State Kissinger and Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko will serve as co-chairman of the Middle East Peace Conference scheduled to begin Friday in Geneva, Switzerland. The significance of this is that it represents something of a setback for the Arab side. Egypt and Syria wanted the United Nations and Secretary General Waldheim to play a large part in the conference. The fact that Kissinger and Gromyko will be co-chairman of the conference became known as Kissinger ended his Middle East tour, and the Israelis announced that they will, after all, attend the conference. Richard Valeriani reports by satellite.
Secretary Kissinger came to Israel to clear away the final obstacles to the opening of a Middle East peace conference in Geneva on Friday. From Tel Aviv Airport, he went immediately to Jerusalem to try to relieve the Israeli government's concern that the United Nations might intrude too much into the peace talks. The Israelis don't trust the UN because they believe it's stacked against them. Kissinger talked with Prime Minister Golda Meir and later members of her cabinet until after midnight. The cabinet then voted in emergency session to send a delegation to Geneva. Kissinger went back to Mrs. Meir's office this morning for another 4 hours of talks, focusing on the agenda and the first stage negotiations about military disengagement on the Sinai front. In a brief departure statement at the airport, Kissinger talked about the upcoming peace conference.
We reached complete agreement about the procedures and terms of reference of the opening of the conference. We've been informed that if the other parties attend, that Israel will send a delegation to Geneva. We also agreed that the opening phase of the conference should deal with the problem of the separation of forces.
Kissinger then flew to Lisbon to thank the Portuguese for their help during the emergency military airlift to Israel during the Middle East War. Richard Valeriani, NBC News, in Israel.
Kissinger's visit to Lisbon coincided today with the arrival in Paris of Le Duc Tho of North Vietnam. Kissinger and Tho will meet in Paris on Thursday. They will meet because the Vietnam peace, negotiated by them last January, has deteriorated badly to the point where there is fighting in some parts of South Vietnam constantly. Lloyd Dobbins has the story from Paris.
North Vietnam's chief negotiator, Le Duc Tho, flew back to Paris to meet later this week with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. It's the second time in 11 months that the two men have met formally in Paris to try to make the Vietnam peace agreement work. Tho said the agreement isn't working now because the United States and the Saigon government have violated every single clause in the original agreement. He said the United States had agreed to withdraw all its troops, but it left behind a force of 10,000 military men dressed in civilian clothes. It was at this time last year that both Tho and Kissinger held news conferences to blame each other for the lack of progress in the peace talks. An agreement was reached a month later. But it's still not working, and Tho told his airport audience that if the United States and Saigon continue to violate the agreement, the North Vietnamese would not stand on the sidelines with their hands in their pockets. Lloyd Dobbins, NBC News, Paris.
A South Vietnamese military spokesman reported heavy fighting today in the Mekong Delta with almost 100 of the enemy killed by government troops. And near the Cambodian border, the battle continues for a district capital called Kien Duc. The South Vietnamese want very much to hold on to Kien Duc simply because it's a district capital. Dennis Trout has the story.
The ceasefire did not bring an end to the war in Vietnam. It brought a kind of half-war, half-peace. In this place, Quang Duc province in the Central Highlands, there is war. The communists decided to attack here because this area would give them a contiguous section of the country stretching from North Vietnam to Tay Ninh province west of Saigon. The district town of Quang Duc stood in the way of a North Vietnamese road building project. The local garrison defending it was overwhelmed by a furious round of communist assaults spearheaded by Russian-built tanks. In less than a day, Quang Duc was partially destroyed, completely abandoned, and had become the prize in a dogged struggle between the two opposing armies. Most of what had been left of the town after the initial day's fighting was leveled during the government's counter-assault, which included heavy air raids, constant artillery barrages, and finally house-to-house fighting involving several battalions of soldiers. Military analysts said its tactical value is questionable, but the South Vietnamese government could not accept the humiliation of losing a district capital. Dennis Trout, NBC News, Quang Duc, South Vietnam.
In Saigon today, the United States asked the ICCS, the Peacekeeping Commission, to investigate a Viet Cong attack over the weekend on an unarmed helicopter. In that incident, an American officer and a South Vietnamese crew member were killed. The American, Captain Richard Rees of Kent, Ohio, was looking for Americans lost in a helicopter crash 7 years ago. The Pentagon said today that the Soviet Union is supplying tanks to Peru. That would be the first time the Russians have sent military equipment to any Latin American country other than Cuba.
Ring in the holidays. Ring out the year. Sparkling with Andre. Love and good cheer. Take Andre home for the holidays. Andre for the holidays.
What's a celebration without Andre champagne to lend sparkle and elegance? And Andre Cold Duck to keep things bubbling along. Greet the season and your friends with the best. Andre.
For the holidays and all year long.
Great lunch, Barbara.
Thank you.
How'd you find time?
Come on, I'll show you. My Amana radar range microwave oven. It cooks most everything in about 1/4 the time, so you use less electricity. And with this radar range browning skillet, you can brown and grill right in your radar range. And you don't waste energy heating an oven. In a radar range, only the food gets hot. The oven stays cool. It's a lifesaver for busy people. But remember, if it doesn't say Amana, it's not a radar range.
The government's energy conservation manager, William Simon, said today that farmers will get the fuel they need to keep people fed and healthy, and that the pharmaceutical industry and its suppliers will get the fuel they need for production and research on drugs. Simon said he would decide this week whether to recommend to the president gas rationing or no gas rationing. The president and Simon have both said they're against it. And in a fuel-saving decision, the Senate voted unanimously today for a 1-year postponement of stricter standards on automobile pollution. Because of the fuel crisis, the automakers are switching to smaller cars, and as part of that change, GM today said 137,000 workers at 24 plants will be laid off for 1 week. And GM isn't the only company doing this. Jack Paxton reports from Flint, Michigan.
More than 100,000 auto workers were laid off today as General Motors closed a number of plants around the country. This Michigan plant and others were shut down to reduce production of big cars, which aren't selling well, and to convert some big car plants to make small cars, which are selling so well car makers can't keep up with demand. Chrysler will lay off 38,000 assembly line workers briefly, also to cut back big car production.
Most of those laid off won't suffer much. Few will be out more than a week, and most under union contracts will get 95% of their regular checks. For them, it's just extra paid vacation. But those without seniority, plus several thousand Chrysler and Ford who've been laid off indefinitely, are not so well off. 4 months ago, David Messmore came from Indiana to Trenton, Michigan, because he got a better paying job at a Ford plant here. Now he has no job at all. He was laid off without pay because he didn't have the 1-year seniority to make him eligible for company benefits. So the Messmores canceled their holiday trip home. They'll give the children less for Christmas and themselves nothing. Messmore said he misses the work almost as much as the money.
there I am, you know, just moved from Indiana and thought that I would make out okay, and here I come up to getting laid off, and it hit me pretty hard. Well, I don't like to stay around the house. I mean, it just, the only thing I can just say is just hang in there. I mean, that's the only thing I can do. I mean, just wait it out.
As far as Christmas is concerned, it's just for children, and it's going to be very skimpy. And it's really hard because they get the magazine that I want this, and I want that, and Santa Claus just isn't going to be able to.
How about the Christmas tree?
Oh, Christmas tree. We got that right away because we couldn't afford it if we waited. So they've got their Christmas tree now, so they're happy with that. So that helps.
Right now, David Messmore is counting himself lucky that he got to work the 3 months needed to be eligible for unemployment benefits, though the $80 a week from that's only one-third what he was making. Messmore stocked up on food with his last paycheck. The food will last another week or two. He doesn't know how long he'll be out of work. Jack Paxton, NBC News, Trenton, Michigan.
Allegheny Airlines said today it will lay off more than 1,200 of its 8,000 employees because of the fuel shortage and ground 36 of its 580 planes. Trading was light on the stock markets today. The Dow Jones Index dropped 4.5 points. The average prices of shares dropped 20 cents on the New York Exchange and 17 cents on the American Exchange. The East Coast was hit by cold, wet, miserable weather today, and in some places by lots of snow. Winter doesn't start officially until Friday, but as these reports show, it's already here in the East.
In New York, the snowstorm was followed by sleet and freezing rain. Highways were covered with sheets of ice. Commuter trains ran hours late or didn't run at all. The heavy ice brought down trees and power wires. Thousands of people were left without electricity. Officials said some might be without power until tomorrow evening. Most suburban schools were closed for the day. In the city, it was almost as bad. Streets were still coated with snow because the snowplows started to work late. Deliveries were held up, businesses slowed down. Even the stock exchanges opened an hour behind schedule. More problems are expected this evening. Some commuters face 4- and 5-hour delays getting home. In the meantime, it's turned colder and more windy. The Weather Bureau wasn't sure just how much more windy. Its wind measuring instruments were frozen. Robert Hager, NBC News, New York.
The snowfall now measures 10 inches in Washington. That may not seem like much in Vermont or Minnesota, but in the nation's capital, it's another crisis. Many Washingtonians do not know how to drive in the snow because they don't get much practice. This storm is the worst here in 7 years. Back in the days of John Kennedy's administration, a heavy snow could bring the machinery of government to a near standstill. Washington now has more snowplows and people who know how to run them. Most government workers were able to get to their bureaucracies today, although they were allowed to report in 2 hours late and leave 2 hours early. But the snow brought some things besides inconvenience, and the first family took time to enjoy some artwork on the White House lawn. John Cochran, NBC News, Washington.
The Senate today confirmed the nomination of Senator William Saxby to be Attorney General. He will succeed Elliot Richardson, who resigned in October over the firing of Special Watergate prosecutor Archibald Cox. Saxby said he plans to take office early next month. Scripps Howard reported today that Senator Hubert Humphrey donated his vice presidential papers to the Minnesota State Historical Society and took a legal tax deduction. There have been questions raised about the deduction taken on President Nixon's donations of his papers. And Senator Barry Goldwater has told the Christian Science Monitor that the president hasn't done enough to clear up Watergate and that he has not won back the trust of the people. Goldwater said, "I don't think it's Watergate, frankly, as much as it's just a question in people's mind of just how honest is this man." Goldwater added, "I hate to think of the old adage, would you buy a used car from Dick Nixon, but that's what people are asking around the country."
How come she's not getting Alpo?
Alpo's for special. It costs more.
Sure, but for a few pennies more, you get a lot more beef.
Charlie, this has beef.
Baby, most dog foods don't have half the beef Alpo Beef Chunks Dinner has. Look, your brand or Alpo. Alpo's got lots of nourishing meat byproducts, real beef, plus soy vitamins and minerals.
She picked Alpo.
Sure. Alpo's got the meat she loves.
You're so smart.
Alpo, a few cents more, a lot more beef.
Here's one of the most thoughtful Christmas gifts a denture wearer could ever receive. The Sonac Denture Cleaning System. It's electric. In just 3 minutes, Sonac removes the stain deposits ordinary cleaners cannot, so dentures feel fresher and smoother. First time, use Sonac 30 minutes. Then just 3 minutes a day removes the stain deposits ordinary cleaners cannot. Sonac. Gift price now at leading drug, discount, and department stores.
Great game, huh? Hey. Hey, man, that's hot leather. Where'd that come from? From my GE heated shave cream dispenser. GE holds 30 of the leading brands of shave cream. And you know, there's nothing like hot lather for a really great shave. Just like a barber. Hey, can I use my brand in there? Sure, GE can hold 30 of the leading brands. Hey, this feels good.
Hey, great game. Hey, that's hot leather. Where'd that come from?
Give the GE heated shave cream dispenser. Holds 30 of the leading brands.
What do you want to know about money? How does compound interest work? Suppose you deposit $50 in a savings and loan and add $50 every month for 15 years. At current interest rates, you could then withdraw $50 a month, every month for the rest of your life, your children's lives, your grandchildren's, forever and ever, and never touch the money you deposited. Your savings and loan wants you to know how money works.
In Boston today, an Iberian Airlines DC-10 with 167 people aboard crash-landed in fog and rain at Logan Airport. The plane skidded off the runway and at least a dozen people were injured. Tony Boyle, former president of the United Mine Workers, was indicted in Pittsburgh today on murder charges in the killings of union reformer Jock Yablonsky, his wife, and daughter. Boyle is in protective custody in a Washington hospital recovering from a suicide attempt. The Supreme Court refused today to review a Federal Trade Commission ban on advertising claims not supported by scientific tests. The case involved Firestone, which claimed that one of its tires gave 25% quicker stops. The court also blocked further use of class action suits to collect for damages to the environment. The court ruled against 4 people in Vermont who represented 200 landowners, claiming that their properties had been damaged by sludge from an industrial plant. The court found that the 4 people could sue for themselves, but not for the others. Industrial development is being fought right now in the Idaho Primitive Area, which includes the Salmon River. Again, environmentalists in the forefront, but in this instance, the government is trying to work out a solution that would avoid future court fights. Catherine Mackin reports.
This is the country where salmon and steelhead trout spawn, and the land of North American elk, cougar, mountain sheep, and black bear. It's the Idaho Primitive Area. It's also the battlefield for one of the last major struggles between environmentalists who want the wilderness left alone and business interests who want it opened in part to mining, logging, grazing, and recreation. Business people call this multiple use of the land. They say it makes more sense than locking up the land, which is what they accuse the environmentalists of wanting to do. The Boise Cascade Corporation, a timber conglomerate with imposing power in this state, is leading the forces to open the land. On the other side, environmentalists know that times are bad for them. Their movement was the first casualty of the energy crisis. And now, Boise Cascade is warning that unless restrictions on using this land are eased up, a lot of jobs are going to be lost around here. This was the first hearing in a series arranged by the federal government as part of the process of deciding what will happen to the wilderness. The final decision will be made by Congress in Washington. This hearing in Boise started at 9 o'clock in the morning and went until midnight. Most who came want the wilderness left pretty much the way it is. They have an important ally in the state's governor, Cecil Andrus.
To place the reclassification issue in perspective, let us first recognize what wilderness means to Idaho and to Idaho people. Wilderness is the way that Idaho was, or more clearly, a small portion of Idaho that should remain the way it was for future generations. Wilderness is a compromise between those who would develop every acre of this state and those who would develop none. And most of all, wilderness is a positive step toward keeping the state of Idaho from ever resembling the shambles of congestion and misery of Southern California and the eastern seaboard.
This is what wilderness is not to the people of this state. A state where backpacking and trout fishing matter more than Monday night football. But it's what many think will happen if restrictions are eased. Blight. It's already started. Still, business interests insist you can have safe, sensible development here while preserving the wilderness for future generations. To which the other side says, that line's been heard before and ignored. They say the safe thing is to leave the wilderness as it is, and future generations can decide for themselves what to do with it. People, animals, plants, fish, and flowing streams have coexisted in this primitive area since more than 6,000 years before Christ. Now there is at least a question whether the delicate balance among them will be allowed to continue. Catherine Mackin, NBC News in the Idaho Wilderness area.
And good night for NBC News.
Come on, taste it. Come on, one taste. Trust me.
Wow, that's good.
You gotta trust me.
Well, you know, Manischewitz conquered wine. I thought it would be sweet.
You're sweet.
I mean too sweet. This is really good.
The taste of grape that makes you want to sing. Sing along with me. Pan Am Manischewitz wine.
I trust you.
$75, Uncle Ned. Cousin Phyllis, $35, $50.
The Bomar brain. It unerringly adds, subtracts, multiplies, and divides. So it can bring good news or bad news.
Now subtract $368 for your dress, $315 the band, $52 for the room leaving.
$1.85.
Dependability and accuracy make the Bomar brains America's #1 selling line of personal calculators.
Such a busy time, except of course for bears. See a brand new holiday special, The Bear Who Slept Through Christmas. TV Guide calls it delightful. You will too. Tonight at 8, 7 Central Time on NBC.
This is Channel 4, WSM-TV, Nashville.